Hi, and welcome to another episode of From Surviving to Thriving. Today, we are talking to Commander Chris Crocket. Well, now today, he is Coach Chris Crocket. He is the head football coach at Alhambra High School. But prior to that, he served for 27 years with the Phoenix Police Department. He retired as a commander, serving here in the South Phoenix area. We have a wonderful conversation about being both Black and blue. We know there is a lot of tension these days between Black Lives Matter or Black people and the police officers. So to talk to someone who is an African American man who has also been a police officer is an interesting discussion. So listen to what Commander or Coach Chris Crocket has to say about being both Black and blue. Hello, Chris. How are you? Good to see you.
I am doing well. Thank you.
And I am so glad that you have agreed to have this conversation with me. I have been wanting to have a conversation with someone who is both Black and blue, who is African American, and who is also very involved with and related to police. You have been a police officer, a commander in the Phoenix Police Force for many, many years. Retired now, but still, this is a relevant conversation for any time. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Well, thank you for thinking about me and having me. So I appreciate it. I'm glad to be here with you.
So I want to start right off the bat. How do you manage, or how did you manage being both Black and blue, being an African American man in a police force? How did you balance that, if there was even such a thing as having to balance it?
Well, there is a fine line because, obviously police officers who are of color, Black or brown, they've been that color their whole lives. And then, they put on a uniform. They are who they are. But I think that one of the things it gives me and some of the other people who are really involved in the community, there's typically a communication gap or a barrier to communication when you put on a uniform. People don't normally see you as a person they can talk to. So when you're in the community as a police officer, that uniform is a barrier to communication. However, sometimes when you're working in mostly Black and brown neighborhoods, that barrier is not as high or not as strong as, say, a white officer dealing with a Black community that they'd have to overcome. And I know many white officers were able to bridge the gap, who are really involved in the community, and people accept them for doing a job. But there are challenges with being a Black and being a police officer. And one of the things that I see on social media all the time is, well, when they're bad police officers, how come the good police officers don't speak up?
Right,
or how come you don't speak up? This thing is happening over here. And what people have to understand, pretty much all law enforcement agencies have a policy about people other than the chief, or people who the chief designates, who can speak to the media. And those consequences of violating that policy are very severe, meaning you can lose your job if you make public comments about another agency. You don't know what's going on, but also you undermine the chief and what the chief might be doing if you speak to the media and you don't have all the facts and everything like that. So there's a fine line. But I tell you, I've been Black a long time, as you can see, this gray beard. And the things that people experience in the community, I didn't walk around my uniform all the time. I've experienced some of the same things and some of the disappointing contacts with police officers as a person walking around without my uniform.
I was going to ask, have you ever been profiled?
I have, and it's not good. And I remember. Before I retired, I was actually a commander in one of the precincts, and I was driving a brand new truck, and a young officer stopped me. And of course, I wasn't speeding. I didn't commit any traffic infractions, but he pulled me over, and I just pulled over and did what I was supposed to do. I waited for the officer to come up, and the officer came up, and as he came up to the car, he recognized me as a commander of the police department, and his expression changed. So I asked him, hey, why, any particular reason why you pulled me over? He didn't have a a reason to pull me over. And that's kind of disappointing. Coming from a member of my own police department, hopefully that was a learning moment for that officer. But there are the vast majority, you talk to any police officer anywhere, and they'll tell you that the vast majority of police officers are doing the right things all the time for the right reasons. But we can't get past the fact that there are a small percentage of police officers who should not be police officers, and the amount of damage that person can do over the course of a 20 and 30-year career, you can't even measure.
Right.
A contact here, a contact there, and it gives a negative opinion about police officers. So there's a fine line. I've had really, really good experiences. I've worked in South Mountain Precinct 5 times in my 26 years with the Phoenix Police Department because I wanted to work down there. I wanted to work in diverse communities. I wanted to do what I can to help the people who are living in my community. I live and have lived where I work because I think that's important as well.
So in light of the example that you just gave, so are there repercussions? Like this officer who pulled you over and had no reason to do it, discovered he made a grave mistake, clearly, when he got to your window. But are there repercussions for those kinds of actions?
Well, they are when you bring those actions forward. In this particular case,
yes,
as a commander, I talked to the guy on the side. I didn't get, the internal affairs or professional standards involved. I used that as an opportunity to talk to him about things. Okay. And I think I was pretty effective of explaining to him that he couldn't do those type of things because of how it appears, and legally you get into some issues about and civilly for that officer being sued and all the things that come with that. Not only that, but I thought about where did he get that? Who trained him to do that?
Right.
And I worked in the academy. I never taught it. We didn't teach people to do that. I think people sometimes get in with a group of officers and they deviate from the policies the Phoenix Police Department has. This is not what we teach police officers, but sometimes they develop those things by being in groups of officers who may not be doing the right things.
Then what do the average Joe Blow person, what do I do? So for example, I was pulled over over here in our neighborhood probably about 5 years ago and did not know why. And the officer walked to and from my car 3 to 4 times without telling me why he pulled me over. And I was literally getting ready to pick up my phone to call Warren to say, I think I'm getting arrested because I can't get any information out of this gentleman. Come to find out, the problem I had was I had a headlight out. That's it, a headlight. But he flustered me so bad because he would come back to my window and I would say, can you tell me what I did? And he would walk away. Then he would come back to my window. I've been pulled over with my daughter in my car, and the SUVs roll up on you from behind, and the next thing you know, you've got 2 officers at your window. And as a woman, it's just terribly, terribly, terribly intimidating. But what does the average citizen supposed to do in a situation like that?
Well, I want to address that, and you have rights and responsibilities as a citizen, as a resident, as a motorist. But one of the things that I used to tell my officers when I was the commander of precincts, when we make a contact with somebody, whether it's a traffic stop or we respond to a call, my thing was, I want you to treat that person not the way you want to be treated, but how would you want your mom to be treated in that situation? If your mother was driving down the street and she ran a red light or committed a traffic violation, how would you want that officer to approach your mother? What kind of demeanor would you want your mother treated with? And when you started thinking, don't treat me the way I want to be treated. Treat me the way you would want your mom or dad or sister or husband or wife treated. I think if we do that, things will be a little bit different as far as our initial contact with police officers. That's what I used to preach. Now, as far as you're concerned, and what people need to understand, they probably shouldn't get all their information from social media and YouTube videos about, well, I'm going to hold the police officers accountable. Because when you're stopped by a police officer, wherever they are, the courts have already given that officer power to detain you. If you're on a road and a police officer stops you, he has a legal right to do that and detain you. And then as a person driving a vehicle, you have to produce identification, registration, proof of insurance.
Yes.
Now, hopefully what you as a resident, as a motorist, if you are stopped, the thing I would tell you and anybody else is, first of all, remain calm.
Yes.
Be calm, even if you're upset, be calm. No furtive movements, keep your hands with it where the officer can see them. Because as a person who trained police officers are trained, and in their training, they are taught about officer safety. And what they see is hundreds of videos of officers being murdered on traffic stops or responding to calls for service, and some guy gets out of the car and shoots them. They see this over and over and over and over again. So they're trained to be cautious, to look for threats, to watch the hands, to look in the occupants of the vehicles. And the courts have given police officers the authority to control the movement of people in the car. So as an example, when the officer stopped you, if an officer says, ma'am, I need you to get out of the car, you have to get out of the car. I mean, there is no.
So all this thing we have in our head about I know
Yes.
my rights.
Yes.
I don't have to move. I can stay in my car. The truth is, none of that is accurate. When the police officer tells you to do something, you're supposed to do what they tell you to do.
In this case, where you are a motorist operating a vehicle on a public right-of-way and a police officer makes a traffic stop on you, yes, you, the motorist, you're required to comply with the officer's direction. So if he tells you, ma'am, I'm going to go back to my car, please stay in the car, you can't get out of the car. He's telling you that, ma'am, please stay in the car. I'm going to go back and do this thing, run a check. For my safety and your safety, please stay in the car. He doesn't know you. He doesn't know where you've come from, what you have in your vehicle. So that's something that the courts have upheld all over the country. They can't control your movement. So again, stay calm, do what the officer says. And even if you feel that you're not being treated fairly, please be calm, because at the scene is not the time to aggravate or have a confrontation with a police officer who may or may not be one of our best and brightest. And most of the police officer contacts are going to be great, but you might run up on an officer who is not so great. So therefore, please, I would urge people to minimize any type of conflict, because you can always, the officer writes your ticket or not writes your ticket. He sends you on your way. Officer, I need your name, your serial number, your badge number. If things are really, really bad, comply with the officer. Officer Jones, please have your supervisor. I'd like to speak to your supervisor. You have that right as a citizen, but you must be calm, because one of the things, the beauty of these video cameras, a lot of police officers have these body cams. Yes. So they see everything, they hear everything. And so what you don't want to be as a resident, or a hysterical, yelling, screaming, cussing at the police officer, and then that is shown when the sergeant gets there and the sergeant says, hey, what happened? Well, look, Sarge, I tried to talk to her and she was yelling, screaming, she wouldn't comply. So those officers may have a camera on their body. They may have a camera in their car. So hopefully everything is caught on tape for your safety and the safety of an officer. But the bottom line is, if you're operating a motor vehicle, you must comply with the commands of a police officer. If he can direct your movements, he doesn't necessarily, ideally, he or she should tell you why. Hey, ma'am, listen, I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable. Right. Please stand. Or I need you to exit the car. And the reason I need you to exit the car, I'm feeling some type of way. Can you please stand on the sidewalk for me? If an officer articulates why he needs a resident to do something, things typically go well. And communication is not a skill that everybody has. Right. And
they don't teach that at the academy?
We try, but the officers who can communicate well with residents and citizens, those are the officers that have less citizens complaints. They get in less fights with people, because you simply know how to talk to people. So, but specifically, here's your responsibility, man. If you have a bad experience with a police officer, the officer was totally bad. He yelled at you, he screamed at you, he cussed at you, he was rude. You have a responsibility to report that officer, because if he did it to you, it's probably not his or her first rodeo. He's probably going to do it to the next citizen. So please report that officer so there's a trail that will follow the officer. Well, he's got 16 citizens complaints about rude behavior in the last 12 months. We need to do something about that.
But do police officers, okay. Well,
I said a lot, but go ahead.
You did, because what I recognized is that you were very clear that that police officers have some authority when you are in a motor vehicle. I have noticed that you have been very clear on that. So the question that popped into my head was, so what if I'm walking down the street? Do they have that same kind of authority to detain me, to question me, to ask me more for my ID, any of that kind of stuff? Or is it their authority changes when it comes to when you're in your car, when you're walking? Does it shift?
It does change. It does change and it does shift. As you walk, now, as an example, there's nothing stopping an officer. You're walking down the street, you're walking your dog, an officer stops to talk to you. Mm-hmm. No, as a citizen or a resident, you do not have to stop and talk to the officer. But there are always some gray areas. What if the officer is responding to a call of a suspicious person?
Right.
So, and let's say your neighborhood. I run by your neighborhood all the time. Give me some water every time you see me, all right? You know I'm thirsty out there. But what I'm saying, very nice neighborhood. And if you called because there was a suspicious person walking in your neighborhood, you want the police officer to come and check him out, right? You want the officers to contact him. So you have to keep that in mind. If there was a call for service, you want the police officer to find out who this person is, do you not? So that's the other thing. But absent a call for service, or an officer has some information that he has to stop you specifically because you're doing something suspicious. As an example, if he's looking over the walls in your neighborhood at 2 o'clock in the morning, most people would say that's suspicious. Mm-hmm. So if a police officer stopped that person, that officer is going to detain that person if he doesn't want to talk to him, because the totality of the circumstance would dictate that some man at 2 o'clock in the morning peeking over an 8-foot-high wall in a residential neighborhood is out of the norm. So we should investigate that. I think you would want a police officer to do that, but there's a certain way to do that. You can't shoot the guy if he doesn't comply. There's certain things that he has to do. We have to use force that is reasonable. So you walking down the street with your dog, what is reasonable for an officer to talk to you? So if you don't want to talk to him, you say, officer, I really don't want to talk to you. Are you saying I must talk to you? And the officer is going to say no. Then you say, okay, I'm going to be on my way. So the key is, are you detaining me, Mr. Officer? Am I being detained? And when the officer says no, well, thank you, I'd rather not.
So that's the operative phrase. Am I being detained?
Am I being detained? Yes.
And if the answer is no, I can go about my business.
Now, I would say, yes, you should be able to go about your business. But what if you have a bad officer, right? What do you do then? Right. Well, if you have a bad officer, the lesser of two evils is to comply and make a complaint about the officer later. And I don't want to use this phrase lightly, but live to fight another battle.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I just want to say this.
Yes.
There is no circumstance, even if you're right. And I'm going to change it. Let's say your husband. Your husband is a man. If a police officer stops and the officer's rude and totally out of control, if your husband fights with that officer, he is going to lose. Because no matter what happens at the scene, there is no winning that at the scene, because your husband's been working out. I see him on the mountain. So even if he's able to, Reverend Dr. Stewart, I see you. But even if he's working out, he may be able to handle that officer, but other officers are going to respond.
They're going to come. It's not one. It's going to be a pack. All going packs.
And if they get there and all they see is an officer getting beat up, they don't know anything about what happened before he got there, right? So what I'm saying is, I want people, and I have 8 adult sons. And what I tell, they look like me, just younger, stronger, taller, and better looking, and smarter. And I tell them, you have to comply. You have to comply. You have to listen to what the officer says and be calm. And why do I tell them to be calm? They can be right. But I don't want to take the chance that something happens to them and they lose their life because they get into a a battle with a police officer, right, wrong, or indifferent, and then I'm burying a child, and I would much rather deal with the aftermath of a citizen's complaint and an inquiry where we would have using the right channels to address any behavior of a police officer than risk somebody being hurt. And Dr. Stork, if I can just say one more thing,
Sure.
I want to use that George Floyd video.
Yes.
I don't know how you can be a human being and not break your heart.
Yes.
It actually broke my heart watching that. To hear that man gasping for breath, asking or telling them he couldn't breathe, asking for mother, and that officer kneeling on that guy and his neck, and the expression of that officer's face on that video is what got me most of all, because he felt like there's nothing that can happen to him. But I want to talk about the bystanders, the lady who viewed the video. A lot of the bystanders were like, hey, get off of him, get off of him. You know, he can't breathe.
Right.
And they say, well, I would have jumped in. Well, if you jump in, you're not going to solve the problem. They're going to handcuff and arrest you too. So there's limited things that people can do. I would Hurley.
Well, that was gonna be my question, because every time I see it, I was like, I feel so moved, and I'm not a big gal, but I think I would have shoved him. I would have shoved the police officer. I know I would have gone to jail. I know I would have probably been risking my life, but I think people are at the point now that especially people of color. How many of us have to keep dying and we just kind of stand on the sidelines and record it? I don't know if I would have had the mental capacity to record it, because I would have probably been in on the officer shoving him. And I know you're getting ready to tell me that I would have been wrong.
And listen, you would have done what was in your heart, but I'm telling you, for your safety, there is no winning that scenario. The only thing that you could have done was what those people did: complain, yell, stop, he can't breathe. You know, call 911 on the police officers. Record the video. Make sure you're there for a good witness, as a good witness, because there was a guy in one of the videos. He was really, trying to get involved, and there was an Asian officer who was standing, and he was keeping the people back. That was his job. George Floyd was getting choked to death behind him, and his job was to keep the people back. Now, he wasn't watching the guy on his neck. His job was to protect the other officers. He didn't see what was going on. I'm not exonerating any of the officers, because if you see some wrongdoing as a police officer and you don't do anything to stop it, you're just as guilty. And that's why they were fired, because they were aware of a guy being murdered in front of them, and they didn't stop it. And that badge gives them not immunity, but you have more responsibility, not less responsibility, to safeguard the people that we take into custody. If I take you into custody, you are my responsibility. It's my responsibility to safeguard your safety. So anyway, let me get back to my point about, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to preach. If you see an instance like that, you have to understand, you can intervene, but are you going to make the problem worse? Because you're going to get arrested. You might get roughed up, and nothing changes, meaning that guy gets arrested that you try to intervene on, and now you're going to jail as well. So you have to do what's in your heart. I want people to be safe. I'm hopeful that with that, and by the way, you mentioned how can you not be a person and being affected? I think it was that moment that changed a lot of different things. A lot of different people and their perception about police brutality, they saw it on film. It's different. When you watch those people marching and demonstrating, a lot of those people that don't look like us. There are a lot of white people who are horrified by that. Now I understand why Colin Kaepernick kneeled. Now they understand. Now they understand what people of color have been going through. And so, and unfortunately, that man died, but I think he's changed a lot of different things.
I do think his death has brought about change, but I recognize that it was a moment in time, and that time is slipping, because we have a very short memory in this country, and sometimes people are like, why aren't you all over it yet? Just like slavery. And it's like, because y'all keep doing it to us. However, I want to circle back around to something you said, because you're like, well, you need to report them. and there would be disciplinary action, potentially disciplinary action. The police department does not have a good reputation about disciplining its own, especially here in Phoenix. I mean, I'll say it, I declare, sometimes the stuff that comes out of police mouth makes me shudder, because they're always on the side of the officer, regardless of how bad it looks. And you start to see that that's the posture of these unions, these police unions around the country. They've got to defend their police officer. And it's like, but at some point, dude, he wrong and need to be fired and needs to go to jail. And they're like, no.
Well, you know what? The relationship with the unions is also, listen, I used to be I was vice chairman or the vice president of our Police Sergeants and Lieutenants Association. Mm-hmm. So I was a part of the union. We were a little different than the officers union because most of us were supervisors. And some of the sergeants and lieutenants, their issues, some of those issues were with management, but some of those issues were with plea and the organization that represents the officers. Mm-hmm. So I want to say any labor, let's say General Motors, or let's say Ford or GM, whatever those plants were in Detroit. Those union stewards, their job is to protect the rights and the benefits of those employees. And they do protect and fight for employees who may be marginal. Or
maybe marginal,
I'm using GM. Or let's use teachers. Now,
okay.
I'm a teacher, right? I instruct in a few universities. I coach football at Alhambra High School, Go Lions. I'm the head varsity coach there. And teachers have a union too. That union is very, very powerful. Unions sometimes, they have to represent employees who may not be the best. And they spend most of their time defending actions of employees who are subpar or get into trouble. I'm talking about teachers, I'm talking about auto workers, I'm talking about police officers.
I see how you have made the whole pot, every union for every organization.
But police officers unions are different in the sense that police officers are the only occupation in the United States who have the authority by law, constitutional law, to take someone's life without age. So the ramifications of protecting bad officers is a lot different than protecting a bad teacher or a bad auto worker. So Absolutely. These things are serious. So if I can take it back to New York as an example, Bill de Blasio, who's the mayor of New York, mm-hmm. He is always publicly fighting with the union, and the union hierarchy. Mm-hmm. Seems like they hate the mayor. And if a union has a contentious relationship with the leader of an organization, that does not mean that the rank and file all believe the same things that the union talks about. Mm-hmm. And I want to tell you that what I found, here's the thing with the Phoenix Police Department. I got the opportunity to serve on disciplinary review boards. The disciplinary review boards consisted of 2 assistant chiefs, 2 commanders, 2 peer officers, and 2 citizens. So these were instances where...
So 2 police, 2 police, 2 police, 2 citizens.
No. 2 peer officers. So if they were an officer, 2 officers.
Yes.
Right?
That's 2 police.
2 officers, 2 citizens.
2 citizens.
2 police commanders.
Police, 2 more police.
And an assistant chief. Now the commanders
2 more police. So what you said is 2 police, 2 police, 2 police, 2 citizens.
But let me just tell you this. It has been my experience, and I've probably sat on probably 30 of them during my time in the police as a commander in the police department. And these are officers. The investigation has found that they were guilty of the infraction. So all they're discussing is discipline, whether it's going to be a suspension or termination or a demotion. Mm-hmm. So they've already been found guilty. But
okay.
Let me tell you this. Here's been my experience, believe it or not. It is the citizens who are a lot more lenient on the officers than those peer officers. Those peer officers they're not lenient on those their peers who are causing them an issue. And I'm telling you, I said, I would invite you, you and your husband could probably be on one of those boards as a civilian. You would actually see it for yourself. Civilians tend to be more lenient on those boards than the officers. The peer officers always want to throw the book, and typically the commanders, half of us want to, be heavy-handed, the other ones be lenient. But it's the citizens, believe it or not, who serve on those boards who are more lenient than the peer officers when it comes to discipline. And I hope you get the opportunity to interview somebody else on the Phoenix Police Department who has experienced this, and they'll tell you the same thing.
Well, that I wish I had some data. Okay, because you never hear about discipline. You never and I recognize that the only police officers that we ever see are usually the ones that are doing something that looks to be, I'm not going to assume that it already automatically is illegal or underhanded or shifty or shady, but those are the ones that you see. So we know that there are a lot of other officers that we don't have any challenges with. But you just never hear these officers, and then it's if they're disciplined in one city, they're hired by another city. All you're doing is playing chess and shuffling around the bad officers from one place to the other, and it just doesn't seem like, the people who suffer from that are the citizens. We suffer.
Well, when you have an officer who winds up getting in trouble and you find out that he was fired by another agency, you lose kind of faith in the system. But I will tell you, there are a lot of states that belong to a coalition that they share information. We have Arizona Post, Peace Officers Standards and Training. They are the governing agency that gives awards police officers their certifications. Mm-hmm. So even sometimes when a police chief can't fire a person for a particular reason, if that information is seen by the Post Board, they revoke and suspend certifications. And they make sure that that certification cannot be used in other states. Some states have this agreement. Some states are not part of the agreement. So right. You could go from agency to agency within the state. And especially if I'm the police chief in an agency and I don't conform to that, I can certainly, if I'm the chief, hire my cousin who's a bad officer in another city. That is a problem. That is a problem. I was just doing a forum 2 weeks ago, and one of my former colleagues sits on the board of Post. This is something nationally the police chiefs across the country are trying to do. And as far as chiefs are concerned, let me just tell you this. Chiefs are bound by rules, by agreements, or labor agreements, but also state law. They require due process. Police officers have due process too before they're terminated. And they have rights and appeals.
Because you said, you alluded to that when a chief couldn't fire a police officer, and that kind of struck me.
Yes.
Because I don't understand why a police chief can't fire a police officer. So help me understand that. Now, it sounds like that's the direction you were going in.
City personnel rules, state laws, city charters. But let me give you an example of one of these things. Chief Harris, he had an officer who he fired. He was accused of planting some evidence on a lady at the shelter. There was and I guess it was, in his mind, some type of joke. They found out about it, and the chief, he had a process, and he fired him. Civil service, which is a recourse that police officers use, he went through civil service, and he was awarded his job back. The police chief and the Phoenix Police Department had to rehire him. So this same police officer, years later, wound up shooting and killing an unarmed man.
Oh, my Lord.
Look him up. His name is Rich Chrisman. He shot and killed an unarmed man. So that day, another officer came forward and saw what happened and said, yeah, this officer shot that guy for no reason. So what did we do as a Phoenix Police Department? We arrested him, booked him in the jail, and there was a trial. He's in prison right now. But during the time that he was in jail, the police chief tried to fire him. There were lawsuits by the union to not allow the chief to fire him. Now, there are laws on the books to protect the due process of employees, teachers, auto workers, police officers, firefighters. In this particular case, the chief tried to fire him because he's like, oh, I'm not going to pay. We shouldn't have to, the citizens of Phoenix shouldn't have to pay this guy for murdering another citizen.
For murder.
And I want to say this because he was found guilty and he is in prison. So there's no doubt about the facts. My point being is the police chief couldn't fire him with the information he had because of laws, restrictions, city charter, personnel rules, and a whole bunch of other things. So sometimes police chiefs, let's talk about Milwaukee, when George Floyd, that police chief fired those officers pretty quick. And you saw the union attacked him for firing those people. And the union will pay for the defense of those officers. In that case, the police chief was able to fire them. In some cases, like Bill de Blasio in New York, he doesn't have the power to do that sometimes because of politics, city charter, laws, and personnel rules.
So it is not as easy as your average organization to fire a police officer. There's
extremely hard.
Wow. I would have never realized that.
It's very, very difficult. So what I'm saying is sometimes police chiefs try to fire police officers. Sometimes when they do, they're in court for a long time. So police chiefs, they have to make sure all the I's are dotted, T's are crossed. The investigation is unbiased and have all the ducks in a row before they can fire a police officer. Sometimes the circumstances are so great that the police chief, he holds what he calls a louder mill, which is just a meeting between that person and police chief. Hey, basically, why should I not fire you? And typically when the chief does that, he will fire the employee and deal with the lawsuits later, which has happened in the case of Rich Chrisman. Now, believe it or not, there are some officers who believe that Chrisman should not have gone to prison or should not have been arrested. But most police officers were like, are you kidding me? You murdered somebody, you tarnished our badge, you hurt our reputation, you made it more difficult for me to go out and do my job, not only here in Phoenix, but when something bad happens in Milwaukee with George Floyd, it affects all police officers.
It does.
As a young,
we look at all of them.
Well, listen, do you remember where you were when you first saw the Rodney King video?
Yes. I don't remember. I remember.
You're probably just a little girl.
I wasn't a little girl. I was a grown woman.
And I'm trying to help you out. So let me tell you where I was. And I'm trying not to say a bad word, but I'm just tell you the first thing that I'll spell it. But I was working plain clothes that day in the airport. We had something going on in the airport. I was my duty. I was plain clothes, walking around in the airport doing some plain clothes stuff. I walked by a bar and I saw the footage of Rodney King being beat by these police officers. And I said to myself, damn, they're whooping that dude's ASS. And I was like, you know, from a police officer, I was an experienced police officer. I'm trying to figure out, this guy's on the ground, just handcuff him and put him in cuffs and take him in. So, but the people in Los Angeles, I had friends in Los Angeles, I had colleagues, other police officers in Los Angeles. People in Los Angeles have been complaining about police brutality for years and decades and decades and decades.
Yes, yes.
It was that Rodney King video that it was caught on tape that people finally opened their eyes and say, well, perhaps there are some officers who do brutalize people and violate their rights.
Yes, and none of those, and all of those officers got off. And you know how I know?
Well, they originally did, but then they were retried for civil rights violation, and they didn't do time.
But that's what I mean about people having a short attention span. Because I remember I was at work. I remember exactly where I was working. I was at my desk.
You were in kindergarten. Tell the truth. You were in kindergarten.
I was in kindergarten, and the teacher, no, but the employees were standing behind me, and I was the only Black. Everybody was white, and all they could say was, well, obviously he must have done something wrong for the police to do that to him. Obviously he had to have been doing something wrong. There was just a complete
Perspective.
disconnect that
And
it
this is
could be that
that-
the police were wrong. So you used a term earlier that I'd like us to circle back around to. You used the term reasonable force.
yes.
And I would like to get an understanding of what reasonable force is, because all of these incidents, majority of them, you'll start to hear this conversation about it was reasonable force. And it's just like, I don't see how it's reasonable force.
Well, you know what? There is a misconception that police officers have some special skills. We're all Jackie Chan martial artists. And really, what reality, police officers, there are people like you who go to the academy, just like you, who decide they want to be a police officer. So we train them. Listen, the police officer, I've trained four recruit classes, one of the best jobs I've ever had as a basic training sergeant, trying to mold civilians into police officers, Phoenix police officers, and agencies from around the country. The majority of those people had never been in a fight in their life. Never been in a fight. So the first time we got into a fight is when we put them in a fight in boxing gloves in the academy. So what I'm saying, they're just normal people. People are afraid, and fear makes you do crazy things. And let's be honest, a lot of people are afraid of black men. Can I get an amen?
Yes.
In church?
Yes.
A lot of people in their congregation who are black are afraid of black men. That's true.
Yes.
I don't want to admit it. So fear makes you do crazy things. And my first thought when I saw that Rodney King video, they were afraid of him. And you hate what you fear, and fear makes you do crazy things. So let me get back to what's reasonable. I want to tell you another secret. Now, you are a Pastor Stewart, I'm just using this as an example, an attractive, in shape woman. And I'm a bear, okay? I'm a multiple black belt person in martial arts. Mm-hmm. I've gone through all kinds of defensive tactics training as a police officer, and in the Marine Corps, I also taught defensive tactics with the Phoenix Police Department. So I'm pretty good with my hands and body. But if I tried to arrest you by myself, I could not arrest you by myself without hurting you, and it's going to look bad. If you resisted, I would actually physically hurt you, put you in handcuffs. And that's the truth. If you don't believe me, play around, say, hey, husband, try to put these handcuffs on me. He could not do that if you let him do it. So what I'm saying is, when you see officers struggling with somebody, even if they're not actively resisting, trying to hurt you, if they're passively resisting by not giving you their arms, it is extremely difficult for a person to be arrested by a single police officer, even two police officers. And I'm talking about a small person. I'm talking about a woman who might be 5 foot, 120 pounds, two big police officers. It would look so bad, those officers trying to arrest her, because it looks bad and they can't do it without her complying, without inflicting pain on her. And that is the truth. So joint locks, pressure points, you'll see sometimes police officers punching people in the thighs or hitting people in the thighs or the large muscles to get them to comply, because physically it's almost impossible for a person.
So this is stuff you all are trained to do.
We are trained to do it, and we still can't do it. I can't do it to you. I mean, if you resisted my arrest, I could not arrest you by myself without seriously putting pain on you if you didn't comply. And that's what people don't understand. And if they don't believe me, they can play around with their husband and wife. Hey, try to put these plastic handcuffs on me. You can't do it. It is physically extremely difficult to do that. Even with skilled people, I'll put you in a joint lock, and still I got to get you to comply to bring me your other arm. I've got one hand holding your arm, the other hand on my handcuffs. I got to reach across or somehow get you to comply to bring me the other arm so I can put those handcuffs on you. So when people are arrested, it doesn't look pretty.
No, even as you describe
it looks bad.
But why wouldn't it? Why why isn't an option to just stop? You know, you've got a civilian who may or may not be right, may or may not be wrong, who's not complying, and you're wrestling and struggling and wrestling and struggling. When does somebody just say, and from a police officer's perspective, let me stop, back up, let me stop, and maybe we can do this again, because I know what they're doing. They're grabbing the things, saying, I need backup, and they're just trying to wrestle, and then two more come, and it's wrestle, and then it's just gone from bad to worse. Why not just stop?
Well, let me give you an example. Let's say domestic violence.
Yes.
When I was a young police officer, and when I was growing up, police officers could respond to a family fight where mom and dad got into it. Maybe mom socked the dad and I got a black eye, and they take the guy around the corner, cool him off, and they let him go. And they let him go back home. We can't do that anymore with domestic violence laws. If a police officer responds to an incident of domestic violence, whether it's mom and dad, sister, brother, gay couples, whatever the case may be, father, son, mother, if there's evidence of a physical injury, our state law says that a arrest must be made.
Well, so no, I'm not talking about something like that. I'm talking about some of this other stuff.
Well, I was just going to say, get back to, let's just say when I have to make an arrest, police officers who are smart and who have the ability to communicate people can basically talk people into their handcuffs. I've gotten into some really, really hairy situation with some really, really hairy guys, and we're able to take them into custody. Well, I mean hairy, but dangerous people.
Yes, yes.
You know, I worked West Broadway Road, I worked the East Broadway Road back when things were not so nice.
Yeah.
And some of those people, pretty tough people, murderers and stuff like that, I was able to take people into custody through communication. Hey man, listen, bro, I gotta take you in. I gotta take you in, brother. I don't want to fight with you. One of us gonna get messed up, but you are gonna go to jail regardless. So let's do it this way. And if you could talk to people, reason with people, 9 times out of 10 it works. But you do deal with people who are mentally ill, really violent criminals who are not going back to prison, and you have no choice to fight them. So the smart officers, when you have an opportunity to get more police officers over to help you, that is the way to do it. Try not to take people into custody unless you can do it safely. But I can tell you, there have been times we had a shortage of police officers, not enough officers on the street. Calls were being unanswered, emergency hot calls, emergency calls for service. There's nobody to answer the call. So if you're arresting somebody, there's nobody to go to those calls. You're by yourself. What do you do? Now, there's certain circumstances where, like, you know what, serious, it's not that serious. I don't think you're going to be a danger. You're not going to kill anybody today. If I let you go, I know where to find you. I can come back tomorrow. But the problem is, think about this. If I go to arrest you, and I have the right to arrest you, and I don't arrest you that day, and I say I'm going to get you later, and in the interim, you involved in other crimes and hurt people, the liability is so great because as a victim of a family who was murdered by somebody who should have been taken in custody the day before, you don't want to hear that nonsense that the officer had the opportunity to arrest him today, let him go, and now my loved one is killed because we didn't take him into custody. So liability is a serious, serious thing. Does a police officer want to take the chance of letting this guy go, knowing he should go to jail, and not locking him up? So let me use DUI as an example.
Okay.
As a young officer, there are many times where I've given people a ride home and didn't arrest them for DUI. As I moved up through the ranks and became a supervisor, I realized the liability that I opened myself up to by taking that person home. Nothing was stopping him from getting in his car and driving again, or we didn't arrest him today, we gave him a ride, and now 3 weeks later he's driving drunk again and he killed somebody. So those are just some things. The liability is too great when we have an opportunity to arrest people who need to be arrested. If we don't do it, there's some liability in case they go and hurt somebody.
So since we're talking about use of force, and most of us are—
Well, you asked me what was reasonable. You asked me what was reasonable.
I did ask what was reasonable.
And I messed up. I'm sorry. I start to preach. Where's my little? I need a napkin. You know, you get dusty. But the courts use mostly what a reasonable police officer would do, not a reasonable citizen. The courts use a reasonable police officer. What would a reasonable police officer do in that circumstance? It's a little bit different than a reasonable resident or citizen.
So that means that it is definable by that person. It is not defined by the department.
No, well, I'm talking about what the courts say. So, did you use force that was reasonable? Reasonable to who? Reasonable to another police officer. If other police officers, I don't want to say it's consensus, but the courts would say, I think a reasonable police officer would have shot that guy because he came at him with a hatchet, right? Or citizens say, well, why didn't you shoot him in the leg?
That was going to be my next question. Why do you all, I know you all shoot for the largest body mass, so that's torso, so that's automatically seems like you're aiming to kill people. Why not shoot people in the leg, shoot them in the arm? I know those are harder to target, but someone lives. They live.
Well, let me put it to you like this. When you're under stress, when you're angry, when's the last time you got angry, man? I mean, really, really mad. Really mad.
I'm just
okay. My husband, we didn't take out the trash, pass the store. Anyway, long story short, I want to tell you, when you're really, really excited and your adrenaline is pumping and you feel your life is in danger, your fine motor skills don't operate well. So even if you are a really, really good marksman shooting at a paper target,
yes,
it's a lot different when people are coming at you, people are moving. People don't stand still. And typically, it takes a lot of it. Most police officers miss. Most people, when they shoot at people, they miss. In the military, if you look at the statistics from the Vietnam War, we shot thousands and thousands and thousands of rounds per one hit. It's because under stress, we don't hit what we're aiming at. And that's trained police officers under stress when people are moving. So the reason that police officers are taught to shoot at center mass, this is the biggest part of the body.
Right.
So you aim at that and you will maybe hit something to stop somebody. And they don't teach you to shoot to kill. They teach you to shoot to stop them from doing whatever it was that they were doing. The other thing, the misconception is that people have, and I've seen this with my own eyes, they think that if you get shot, that you're going to stop doing what you're going to do. People have been shot in the head and continue to go through with acts of violence and still murder people with knives and machetes, being shot multiple times, even in the head. You don't automatically stop doing what you're doing. You still have enough body blood pumped from the heart to your muscles to continue to do something. So as an example, if you had a baseball bat, and were coming at me with a baseball bat, when you got to within 21 feet of me, I have to either shoot you or get hit with the bat. So 21, same thing with a knife. They teach police officers that's the 21-foot rule. After 21 feet, it's too late. You can put rounds in that person. That is not going to stop them from doing what they want to do. Meaning, if you shot me in the heart, I can still continue to do what I want to do. So if you shot me in the leg, if I was aiming for the leg, that person's still going to be able to do what they want. But the legs are a lot harder to target, or shoulder is a lot harder to target than center mass. Police officers only spot guys with sniper rifles who are trained. If you have a rifle with a scope and a sight, those officers may have the precision and the skill set to shoot a particular target. Maybe not shoot the gun. The gun. I've seen a SWAT guy shoot the gun out of the hand of a guy, but that guy had a sniper rifle, and he was a trained marksman.
So, but then why then do you see every officer start shooting? One person at a distance, 5 officers, everybody unloads.
That's a problem.
It seems like overkill. Yes.
Well, I can't tell how other officers are trained, but in groups of officers, we try to designate say we got to arrest this guy. We
Yeah.
know he might be, he's got a baseball bat. Maybe we got 4 officers. 2 of those officers would be what we call the arrest team. They would go hands-on. 1 officer would be standing by with lethal force in case things got out of hand. He would be the only shooter. Another officer would have a stun bag or something less lethal. So if you have time to set it up, ideally that's the way it goes. But police officers are trained to only shoot when they see a threat. The police officers who are shooting because they see shooting or hear a shooting, they're wrong. They shouldn't be shooting. And when they have to explain, police officers have to account for every round. You have to have a reason why you fired your gun. Now, if your reason is, well, the other officers are shooting, that's not a good reason. You have to see something that causes you to believe somebody's life was at threatened, and then you took action to save that person's life or to stop that person from doing some harm. So when you get 10 officers shooting and they all start shooting, they better had all saw the same thing.
But if they all see the same thing, and I guess what you're saying is because they don't have an opportunity to communicate who's the shooter, who's going to be, but then they all, so if one of them, when you start to hear everybody else, shouldn't you stop something? I mean, or is it just, because it just looks like chaos?
Well, when you're under stress, and I talked about it before, your fine muscle movement, but your hearing goes, your vision narrows. This is a natural form of stress. Your body's pumping blood to the large muscles, your fight or flight.
Yeah.
And the fine motor skills and the auditory and your vision, all that stuff shuts down. That's some kind of science. I'm just a old, beat up, dumb Marine, but this is actually science. And you kind of lose sight of what's happening on peripheral when you're under stress. And that's basically the answer. Now, there's no excuse for a police officer firing a gun if he or she doesn't have a reason. He sees something and needs to take action. But that officer who sees that may not even see another officer who sees the same thing and is firing. He may not hear that gunshot. And inevitably, what happens with police officers when they fire multiple rounds, they'll ask the police officer, hey, okay, how many rounds did you fire? Fired 2. And they'll look, fired the whole magazine. That's stress. Yeah. It's not necessarily being dishonest, but under stress, dang, I only thought I shot 2 times. I shot 18 times.
So this has been very enlightening. As we bring this conversation to a close, I am curious because you said you have these grown sons. Yes. And at some point you had to have the talk with them. How did you have the talk with them, and what is the best advice you would give to a parent who's trying to keep their young African-American son alive?
Listen, you asked me a great question, and I told you my 8 grown sons. My oldest son will be 40. My youngest adult son just turned 18. But when that incident that happened in Florida with Trayvon Martin happened, I talked to my sons about that because I had generally talked to them about how to deal with a police officer if he stops you, if you're driving. Be calm, keep your hands where you can see him, no further movement, don't reach for your cell phone, don't do anything. The officer tells you to get out of the car, yes, sir, no, sir, be polite. And if there's anything happen, you call me afterwards and I'll deal with it. So that's what I tell my kids. But I wouldn't tell them. When that Trayvon Martin thing happened, that wasn't a police officer. That was just some citizen playing police officer.
Right.
And even in those circumstances, listen, we have to live to fight another day. We have to tell our young Black men and our Black women that we have to, number one, be calm. We have to somehow, bring the situation down by being calm. We don't want to aggravate the situation. I know people get pissed off when they feel that their rights have been violated or they feel like they're being treated unfairly. But I want these people to live, to be able to go on with their life. And if an officer does something wrong, bring it to the attention of the people who should hold that officer accountable, whether it's that officer's chain of command, the Internal Affairs Bureau, with the police department, or you can go to your city council person. You can go to the Attorney General's office. There's a lot of places you can go to make a complaint. But what people can't do is trying to win at the scene. If if a woman has a teenage son who's being arrested, if she interferes, she may not only be arrested, but she may be hurt in the process as well. I know it doesn't sound right, but I'm trying to make sure people understand. I don't want people to get hurt. I don't want people to be, God forbid, killed trying to take action and interfere with law enforcement. Here's the other thing. People don't always see the whole story, right?
Right.
They see
right,
a police officer taking somebody into custody. They don't see that he stabbed some lady and they're fighting with this officer who just murdered somebody. They don't see the whole story. They come in at the end. Now, they're perfectly within their rights to stay out of the immediate area and tape record it or videotape it, do that. But if an officer tells you to step back, guess what? You have to step back. When you can record from a distance, you can record any police officer. That's another thing. There's a misconception. You can record a police officer. There's nothing wrong with it. You just can't do it in his face or interfering with his or her crime scene when you do it. So please, people, first of all, follow the law. As an example, you're driving around with no insurance. What do you think's going to happen? You're going to get a ticket and stop one day, right? Right? You're speeding down the street. You're speeding down the street, racing another vehicle. Odds are, eventually a police officer is going to stop you. So what I'm saying is comply. And then once you comply, be calm. Write everything down when it's fresh in your memory. If you didn't record it, at 8:59, I was stopped by a white female police officer at 29th Street and Rozier. Here was the car number. She refused to give me her badge number. Here's a description of the lady, and then we can take it from there. Use the system to correct bad police behavior. But here's the other thing, and the last thing I want to tell you, I know we've been talking a long time. The thing that I worry about the most is all these incidents on video that are happening. It's not necessarily that they're happening more, they're just being recorded now.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I was a kid, these things did not exist. Right. Not saying police brutality didn't exist, we just didn't record it.
Didn't have
so
recorders.
What's going to happen? Who is going to want to be a police officer now? That's the scary thing. If we don't push people, good people, especially people of color who want to serve their community as police officer, who will? Who's going to be the next generation of police officer? That's the thing that scares me the most, that we don't have young people who want to be police officers. When I go talk to students back before the COVID, I would talk to kids, and years ago, a lot of people raise their hand and want to be a police officer. When I retired, and shortly after I retired, not a lot of kids wanted to raise their hand to be police officers. And that's a sad thing for me when I think about the future.
Well, thank you so much. This has been an enjoyable conversation with you about being both Black and blue, and giving us some great insight into how the system works, some areas in the system that we need to work on, as well as how to get out of a situation with the goal to stay alive, fight another day.